I never thought that, at 44, I'd find myself sleeping with a woman 2 decades younger than me, let alone doing it out of spite. But life has a funny way of kicking you when you're down. Just when you think you've got it all figured out, it throws a nasty curveball straight to the gut. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back to the beginning. My name's Tom, nothing more than your average middle-aged guy. I've never been anything extraordinary, at least until this whole mess started. I've been married to Anna for 16 years. We crossed paths in our late 20s when I was still bright-eyed and far less gray. She was that kind of woman who could walk into any room and make every person feel like they mattered. And to be honest, I was drawn to that. It made me feel like I had hit the jackpot. Our marriage was, well, it was what you'd expect. Not perfect by any means, but show me a marriage that is. We had our good days and bad ones, but I never doubted our ability to weather the storms. We weren't the lovey-dovey, always on cloud nine couple, and yeah, we had our fair share of arguments, but we always found a way back to each other, or so I used to believe. Looking back now, I realize I was just another clueless husband, thinking everything would work out if we just kept pushing forward. And then there's Mike, my so-called best buddy. We've known each other for close to 20 years, ever since we used to work together way back when. The guy's been through a lot. He lost his wife in a car accident about a decade ago. It left him alone with his daughter, Claire, who was only 10 at the time. I still remember how broken he was that first year. The man was barely keeping it together. Anna and I did everything we could to support him, especially Anna. She took on this nurturing role with Claire, almost like she was trying to fill the hole that Mike's wife left behind. Claire practically grew up in our home. She called me Uncle Tom, and over the years, she got comfortable enough to confide in me, telling me things she'd never share with her dad. You know how teenagers can be, they'd rather talk to anyone but their parents about their lives. I thought of her as a little sister, and I'm pretty sure she saw me as more of an older brother. She'd come to me with all her teenage drama, boys, school stuff, you name it. Mike seemed to appreciate it, or at least that's what I thought. Since they lived nearby, they'd often stop by without warning, just like family would. It was normal. Hell, Mike was almost a permanent fixture in our house. But looking back now, I had no clue that this closeness was going to spiral into something much darker. Then, one day, everything just fell apart. I wasn't supposed to be home that day. I had been at work, just going through the usual grind, when this sharp pain in my stomach hit me out of nowhere. My boss, a pretty decent guy, told me to take the rest of the day off and go home. So, I did, thinking I'd just crash into bed and sleep it off. Except that's not what happened. When I pulled into the driveway, there it was, Mike's car parked right out front. Now, that wasn't all that unusual. He'd often leave his car there when he came by, whether it was to grab a drink or to chat about work. But something felt off this time. Call it a hunch or paranoia, but something didn't sit right with me. The front door was locked. That wasn't like Anna at all. We lived in a quiet neighborhood where nobody bothered locking their doors during the day, especially when we had friends over. But there it was, locked up tight. I pulled out my keys, walked in, and was met with an eerie silence, so quiet it made my skin crawl. And then I heard it, faint at first, but clear as day, the sounds of moaning, gasps, and muffled voices. My heart stopped cold. My mind couldn't wrap itself around it. No, this couldn't be real. This wasn't happening. But it was. I didn't think, I just reacted. My legs moved on their own, carrying me up those stairs faster than my mind could even process what was happening. As I made my way down the hallway, each step felt like a plunge into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I didn't go in unprepared either. I grabbed a bat from the closet on my way up. Someone was going to pay for this, that much I knew. When I got to the bedroom door, I stood there, heart pounding, for what felt like an eternity. Then I shoved it open. What I saw knocked the wind right out of me. There she was, my wife of 16 years, straddling my best friend. They both froze, their faces turning pale the moment they saw me standing there, gripping that bat. Karen's jaw dropped, but no sound came out. Mark scrambled off the bed like a cornered animal. I didn't say a damn thing. I walked straight up to him and swung the bat down hard onto the floor, the crack echoing through the room. He flinched, but I wasn't aiming for him, at least not yet. I didn't need to speak, their betrayal was written all over their faces. Karen, ever the manipulator, finally managed to choke out some words. Tom, wait. Don't do something you'll regret. Let's talk about this. Talk. You want to talk after this? I let the bat drop to the floor and drove my fist into Mark's face, then hit him again and again. The third punch split his lip, blood dripping down his chin. Karen screamed and tried to pull me off him, but I was way past caring. What the hell, man? Mark finally spat out, eyes wild with fear. How long? I snarled, my voice trembling with rage. How long has this been going on? They just stared at me, speechless. Useless. I didn't stick around to hear their excuses. I grabbed the bat, walked out the front door, and went straight for Mark's car. I smashed the windshield, dented the hood, and shattered the side mirrors. Every swing of that bat, I kept thinking, how the hell did my life get to this point? I climbed into my own car and drove off. At first, I had no idea where I was heading, just driving to escape. Then it hit me, I needed a drink. No, I needed to get completely plastered. So, I headed straight for the bar, the one place where things always made sense, where the world felt a little less messed up. I walked in, still gripping the bat like it was my last defense against the chaos swallowing up my life. The usual crowd was there, each of them lost in their own problems. I didn't say a word as I made my way to the counter, but I could feel their eyes on me. It's not every day you see a guy like me walk in at noon, especially looking the way I did, like I'd just come back from the front lines of a war. Whiskey, I muttered, not bothering to look up at the bartender. I didn't have to. Frank was his name, a solid guy, had seen his fair share of life's ugly side. He'd been working that bar for as long as I could remember, always ready with a joke or a bit of wisdom, depending on what you needed. He didn't ask any questions, just poured the whiskey and set the glass in front of me. I downed it in one gulp, the burn hardly even registering as it went down. By the time I ordered my third glass, Frank leaned in closer, raising an eyebrow. Everything all right, Tom? Not like you to be here this early in the day. His voice had that steady calm, the kind that comes from listening to 1,000 sob stories, but there was a hint of concern there, too. Nobody had ever seen me like this, not in all the years I'd been coming here. I let out a short, bitter laugh that sounded more like a bark. You ever walk in on your wife screwing your best friend? Frank's eyes widened just a bit, but he didn't look shocked, more like he'd heard this kind of thing before. Damn, he said, letting out a low whistle. That's a tough break, man. Rough doesn't even begin to describe it, I muttered, swirling the whiskey around in my glass, watching how the amber liquid caught the light. I stared into it like it might give me some kind of answer, like it could make sense of this mess, but it didn't. Nothing did. I don't know what made me spill everything to him. Maybe it was the booze, or maybe I just needed to let it all out before it devoured me from the inside. But I laid it all out there for Frank. I told him about walking in on them, the looks on their faces, the sound of that bat slamming into the floor. I described smashing Mark's car, the punches I threw, and how it felt like the ground had been yanked out from under me. Frank listened the whole time, never interrupted. When I finally stopped, he reached out and patted my shoulder, his hand heavy but oddly comforting. That's a hell of a situation, man. No other way to slice it. I nodded, my eyes fixed on the empty glass in front of me. Hell didn't even cover half of it. But listen, Frank continued, leaning in closer. The main thing here is not to fall apart. You can't let them come out on top. I looked at him, absorbing the weight of what he was saying. What would you do if you were in my shoes? He didn't miss a beat. Me? Well, I'd probably do what you're doing now, drink myself into a stupor and maybe smash a few things. Hell, let's make it official. He grabbed another glass, poured himself some whiskey, and clinked it against mine. To lousy friends and cheating spouses. That made me smirk, the first real emotion I'd felt all day. We both knocked back our drinks in one shot. But afterward, he set his glass down with a heavy thud and leaned in again. You want revenge. The kind that leaves them with absolutely nothing. Take it all, your wife, that so-called friend of yours. Make them regret the day they messed with you. His words hit me harder than the whiskey. Revenge. Wasn't that exactly what I wanted? To see them suffer, to tear apart their lives the way they had shredded mine. I'm gonna do it, I said, my voice low but steady. I'm going to bring them down. Leave them with nothing. Frank nodded approvingly, but his face softened a little. Just be smart about it, Tom. You're a decent guy. Don't let this turn you into something you're not. Hours blurred by as I sat there, drinking until I couldn't see straight. I had no idea how I was going to get home, and honestly, I didn't care. My mind was tangled up in a haze of whiskey and rage. Frank must have seen it. Before I could even think about stumbling out to my car, he slid his hand across the counter and snatched up my keys. You're not driving anywhere, Tom. You can pick these up when you're sober. I opened my mouth to argue, but the truth was, I wasn't in any shape to fight him on it. So I just nodded and slumped back onto the stool. Taxi's on the way, Frank said, already dialing the number. When the cab pulled up, I barely managed to climb into the back seat without falling over. The driver stayed quiet, thank God. He just drove, and I spent the whole ride staring out the window, watching the city blur past like it wasn't even real. I don't remember much after that, just stumbling through my front door, into the place where it had all gone wrong. The house felt empty, like a shell of what my life used to be. I collapsed onto the couch, still fully dressed, and passed out. When I woke up the next morning, it felt like my skull had been run over by a semi. My mouth was dry as a desert, and every muscle in my body screamed in pain. But the worst part wasn't physical. By the time I dragged myself off the couch that afternoon, my head was still throbbing from the hangover, but I knew I didn't have time to wallow. I had to make my next move. The divorce wasn't going to handle itself. It was time to take action. I grabbed my phone and called the first divorce lawyer who came to mind, a guy named Rick. I'd met him at a work event a few years back. We'd chatted now and then, and I knew he specialized in ugly situations like mine. Rick, it's Tom. I need to talk about a divorce, I said, my voice flat and devoid of any interest in small talk. Tom. Wow, I didn't expect to hear that from you, Rick replied, sounding somewhere between shocked and sympathetic. Alright, lay it all out for me. I gave him the rundown, Anna, the cheating, and the 16 years we'd spent together. I didn't sugarcoat a single detail, not with Rick. If I was going to make sure Anna didn't walk away with anything, he needed to know the whole picture. When I hung up, I felt slightly better. Not by much, but a little. That's when I noticed it, Anna's laptop sitting right there on the dining room table. Her work laptop. She had a big presentation coming up the next day, she'd been going on about it for weeks. It was the kind of meeting that could make or break her career, and I knew how stressed she'd been over it. And then it hit me, a way to get my revenge, to make her life just that much harder. I sat down, flipped open the laptop, and started skimming through her files until I found the presentation. I'm no tech expert, but I knew enough to make a few subtle changes that would throw a wrench in her plans. I scrolled through the slides, searching for the right spot to strike. And then an idea came to me. Her meeting was with some high-ups from a Korean company. A quick Google search led me to some things that could be seen as offensive, nothing blatant, but just enough to create an awkward situation. I inserted it right into the middle of the presentation, hidden enough that it wouldn't be caught until it was too late. I also tossed in a few inappropriate images, burying them deeper into the slides. Not at the beginning where she might spot them during a quick run-through, but right in the middle of her big moment. I wasn't just aiming to ruin our marriage, I wanted to disrupt her entire life. My head was still pounding, so I took a couple of painkillers and lay down. By evening, I felt a little better, just in time for Anna to walk through the door. She came in acting like nothing had happened, probably thinking she could smooth things over with words like she always did. "Tom, we need to talk," she began, her voice calm but carrying that cold edge I'd grown to hate. I didn't even look at her. "Go to hell, Anna. We're getting a divorce." She didn't miss a beat. "You're being foolish," she snapped, crossing her arms, likely assuming I'd calm down after a while, as if this was just another petty argument about bills or dinner plans. "We'll see who's the fool," I shot back, getting up and heading out to the porch. I had nowhere to go. Neither did she. The house was big enough for both of us, but that night, it felt like a prison cell. There was no way I was sleeping next to her, so I figured I'd just crash on the couch again. But I didn't even make it through the whole night. It was a few hours past midnight when my phone buzzed. At first, I thought it was another spam call, but then I saw the name on the screen, Claire. Mark's daughter. I picked up, my voice groggy. "Hello." At first, I couldn't make out what she was saying, her words were slurred and jumbled. But after a moment, it became clear, she was drunk. Really drunk. She'd been at some party and couldn't get herself home, so she called me, of all people, to pick her up. She didn't want her dad finding out, and I guess I was the only one she trusted enough to call. So I threw on some clothes, grabbed my keys, and headed out. When I pulled up to the address she'd given me, Claire was leaning against a wall, barely able to stand. The smell of alcohol hit me long before she even reached the car. She stumbled over, and I opened the door for her. She practically collapsed into the passenger seat. "What the hell, Claire?" I said, my voice filled more with concern than anger. "This isn't like you." She waved me off, her head flopping against the seat. My boyfriend, he cheated on me," she slurred, sounding like she was on the verge of tears but still wearing a strange, drunken smile. It was a mess. I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy. I knew exactly what that betrayal felt like. "You're not the only one who's been stabbed in the back," I replied, keeping my eyes glued to the road. She turned to me, her drunken curiosity sparked. "Who else?" I sighed, giving her a quick rundown of what had happened with Anna and Mark. I didn't dive into the gory details, but it was enough for her to get the general idea. "Oh, Uncle Tom," she whispered, leaning closer, her hand landing on my leg. "I'm so sorry." At first, I thought she was just trying to comfort me, but her hand stayed there. It moved slowly up and down my leg, and I felt my whole body tense up. "Claire, stop," I said firmly, grabbing her hand and moving it away. But she didn't stop. Her touch returned, more persistent now, her intentions all too clear. "I want to make you feel better," she whispered, her hand wandering back to my thigh. I tried to resist. I really did. But the anger, the betrayal, the alcohol, they all collided in a twisted whirlwind. At some point, I stopped caring. Maybe it was revenge, maybe it was just the booze clouding my judgment, but when she unzipped my fly and bent down, I didn't stop her. She was good at what she was doing. In that moment, Jason and Anna vanished from my mind. All that mattered was the here and now, a dark satisfaction in crossing a line I could never uncross. When she was done, she sat back up, her lipstick smeared, her makeup a wreck. "There's a hotel nearby," she said, her voice low and teasing. "You don't want to go home, and neither do I." I didn't argue. We drove to the hotel and spent the rest of the night tangled in the sheets, doing things I never imagined I'd do with Claire. I was 44, but for that night, age didn't matter. Somehow, I managed to keep up with her. Morning came, and she woke me up, grinning. "Let's take a picture," she said, grabbing my phone since hers was dead. I have no idea why, but I let her. She posed with her smeared makeup and messy hair, and I snapped the photo, her lipstick still smudged on my skin. After that, we fell back into bed, and by the time I woke up again, reality crashed down hard along with the hangover. I had crossed a point of no return. I didn't exactly regret it, but I knew things were about to get a whole lot messier. When we finally stepped out of the hotel into the harsh morning light, it felt surreal, like one of those mornings where everything should be normal, but the weight of what had happened hung in the air like a dark storm cloud. Claire was the first to break the silence, lighting up a cigarette and blowing out a long stream of smoke like she didn't have a care in the world. "You know," she said casually, like we were just chatting about the weather, "you could show that picture to my dad." I stopped dead in my tracks, staring at her. "What?" She took another drag, giving me a sideways look with a grin that didn't match the gravity of what she was suggesting. "I mean it. You could show him that picture of me. I don't give a damn anymore." I shook my head, trying to wrap my mind around what she was saying. "Why on earth would you want me to do that?" Claire shrugged, still grinning like this was some twisted game. "I've been trying to get away from him for years. He won't let me go. Every time I bring up moving out or living my own life, he hits me with that whole, 'you won't survive without me' crap. I'm done with it, Tom. Maybe if he sees the picture, he'll finally get it. Maybe then he'll let me live my own life." I just stared at her, letting the weight of her words sink in. This wasn't some bratty, rebellious act. This was years of being suffocated under Mark's control, feeling trapped by her own father. And she was ready to use me, use what we had done, to shatter her life if that's what it took to finally break free. "I'm not going to do that," I replied. But, in truth, the idea had already crossed my mind. It was just another way to get back at Mark, another chance to rip everything apart. "Suit yourself," she muttered, flicking the cigarette butt into the gutter. She seemed completely indifferent, like the consequences didn't matter to her anymore. "But if you change your mind, you know where to find me." I dropped her off at her place, and we barely exchanged a word during the drive. Her words echoed in my mind, though. I couldn't stop thinking about that photo, the image of her smeared makeup, the lipstick stains still marking my skin. It felt like a ticking bomb, ready to blow everything sky high. And part of me craved that explosion. I wanted to burn it all down, leave nothing but ashes in my wake. When I got back home, the tension hit me like a wall before I even stepped inside. Anna's laptop was still sitting on the dining room table, a silent reminder of the chaos I'd set in motion. She had no clue what she was walking into, the presentation she'd been stressing over for weeks, the one that could make or break her career, now turned into a catastrophe waiting to happen. I didn't have to wait long. Anna came through the door just before dinner, slamming it so hard that the pictures on the walls rattled. She didn't even glance in my direction, her face twisted with sheer, raw fury. Before I could say a word, she hurled the laptop across the room. It hit the wall with a crack, the screen shattering into pieces as it crashed to the floor. "You idiot," she screamed, her voice ragged with rage. "You did this, didn't you?" I didn't move from my spot on the couch, just watched her with a calmness I didn't really feel. "Maybe." She stormed across the room, her face beet red, eyes blazing. "You sabotaged my presentation, you Do you even realize what you've done?" I didn't even blink. "Yeah, I know exactly what I've done." Her hands shook, and for a second, I thought she might actually take a swing at me. "They fired me, Tom. Fired me in front of the entire company. Do you have any clue what that means?" No one's going to hire me now. I'm finished. I raised an eyebrow. Good. Her scream was a wild mix of anger and sheer desperation. She grabbed the back of a chair and threw it to the side. You ruined me. You've ruined everything. And for what? To get back at me? Well, screw you, Tom, because guess what? I've been screwing Mark for years. We didn't even wait after his wife's funeral. You were too blind to see it. That hit me like a sucker punch. I had expected betrayal, but the timeline, the fact that they started right after his wife's funeral, it was cruelty on a level I hadn't imagined. My stomach churned, bile rising in my throat. How could I have been so blind, so naive, for so long? They had been at it while I was mourning with him, supporting him through his loss, and all the while, they were betraying me behind my back. I stood up, my fists clenched at my sides. Go to hell, Anna. She stormed off, slamming the bedroom door behind her. And just like that, she was out of my life, at least for the moment. But I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. I sat back down, my mind still buzzing from everything that had just unfolded. That's when I picked up my phone. I scrolled through my messages until I found Mark's contact. My finger hovered over the photo of Claire for a moment before I hit send. The image, her messy makeup, that look on her face, was now on its way to him, the final nail in his coffin. I didn't care what happened next. I just wanted him to feel the pain, the betrayal, the chaos that had turned my life upside down. 15 minutes later, I heard the screech of tires as Mark's car came to a stop outside my house. He didn't bother knocking. The door flew open, and he stormed in like a man possessed, rage twisting his features, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles turned white. What the hell is this, Tom? He bellowed, holding up his phone with the image of his daughter staring back at me. I didn't even bother to stand up. What do you think it is? That's when he lunged. His fist collided with my jaw, sending me staggering back, but I swung right back at him. We crashed into the coffee table, shoving, punching, grabbing whatever we could get our hands on to inflict damage. This wasn't like the fights you see in the movies, it was raw, primal, just two broken men, betrayed and furious, lashing out in the only way we knew how. At some point, we ended up on the floor, both of us exhausted, bloodied, and bruised. We lay there, panting, staring blankly at the ceiling like a couple of beaten-down dogs who had fought each other to a stalemate. Not a word passed between us. What was there left to say? We had both ruined our lives in different ways, and now we were just lying amidst the wreckage. That's when I heard the sirens. 10 minutes later, the cops busted through the door. One of the neighbors must have seen us brawling through the window and called it in. They pulled us apart, hauling us to our feet and dragging us out to the patrol cars. I spent the next few hours sitting at the station, mostly in silence. Neither of us pressed charges, we were too drained, too broken to keep up the fight. Eventually, they let us go with nothing more than a warning. When I got home that night, I felt something strange settle over me. For the first time in a long while, I felt lighter. Not exactly better, but there was a sense of release, like finally letting go of all the pent-up rage and grief that had been eating me alive. I didn't care about Anna, Mark, or Claire anymore. They could all go to hell for all I cared. In the end, maybe I was the one who set fire to everything, but after all that had happened, I was okay with that. Sometimes, burning it all down is the only way to survive and walk away from the ashes. Anna and I separated faster than I expected. After everything we'd been through, there wasn't much left to salvage. There was no point in dragging it out, no love, no trust, just a hollow void where our marriage had once been. It was like watching a building burn to the ground and realizing, halfway through, that there wasn't anything worth saving in the first place. We signed the papers, split the assets, and went our separate ways. A few months went by, and we finally sold the house. That place had once been everything, our home, the place where we'd planned our future, fought over the small things, and even made some good memories once upon a time. But now, it felt more like a tomb. The walls still echoed with all the arguments, betrayals, and that final, brutal collapse. I felt a wave of relief when it sold. It meant I could close that chapter for good and move on. We both moved to different parts of town. I found myself a small apartment on the other side, nothing fancy, but it was mine. It felt like a fresh start, something I could control. As for Anna, I didn't care where she went, as long as it was far away. That was enough for me. I took comfort in knowing there was no chance of running into her at the grocery store or any of our old spots. We both needed distance, and now we had it. Claire, though, she surprised me. After we each went our separate ways, she really took control of her life. She moved out of her dad's house, found a solid job in another city, and started building a new life for herself. In a strange way, I felt proud of her. We still talk every now and then, just light, casual conversations. She checks in on me sometimes, and I do the same for her. It's weird, though. We haven't seen each other face to face since that night at the hotel, and I think we both know it's for the best. I never wanted to keep that going. Whatever happened between us was a one-time thing, fueled by anger and alcohol. We both needed an escape that night, but I wasn't looking to turn it into something more. Some things are better left in the past. Anna, on the other hand, didn't land on her feet quite as gracefully. The fallout from her disastrous presentation spread like wildfire. Word got around quickly in her industry, and after that, no one wanted to take a risk on her. Getting fired was one thing, but the rumors and stories about what went down in that boardroom left her blacklisted. She tried to find work, bounced around from one place to another, but nothing lasted. No company was willing to hire someone who'd humiliated themselves in front of a room full of executives. What really got to me was hearing about her and Mark. Yeah, after everything blew up, they actually tried to make it work. Maybe they figured that since they'd already destroyed their marriages, they had nothing left to lose. But a relationship built on lies doesn't have much of a foundation. The thrill they had sneaking around behind my back fizzled out pretty quickly when they had to face each other in the harsh light of day. From what I gathered, things went south fast. They both started drinking heavily, it became a nightly ritual, just the two of them trapped in a cycle of booze and bitterness. I suppose they thought alcohol might help them forget, but it only made everything worse. When you start drinking to drown out your problems, the only thing you end up drowning is yourself. It didn't take long for their relationship to implode. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that it all came to a head one night. They got into a nasty fight, worse than any before. Mark hit her, hard enough that she had to go to the hospital, and he ended up in jail. I'm not sure if she pressed charges, I never bothered to find out. I just didn't care enough about the details. One way or another, they got what was coming to them. As for me, things slowly began to look up. It wasn't a straight shot to happiness, but little by little, life started to get better. I've always been the kind of guy who thinks he can handle things on his own, that asking for help is a sign of weakness. But after everything that happened, I realized I couldn't carry all that weight by myself. The anger, the betrayal, the guilt, it was like a poison, eating away at who I used to be. So, I swallowed my pride and started seeing a psychologist. It wasn't easy at first, sitting there and spilling my guts to someone who didn't know me or what I'd been through. But after a few sessions, I began to see how much I needed it. I needed someone to help me unpack all the mess I'd buried inside. It felt like lifting a weight off my shoulders that I didn't even realize I'd been carrying. I also went back to the bar. Frank, the bartender, had been there for me from the start, even if he didn't know the whole story. One night, after a few drinks, I finally laid it all out for him, about Anna and Mark, about Claire, about the photo, the fight, all of it. I half expected him to judge me, to look at me like I was some kind of monster, but he didn't. He just listened, nodding along like he'd heard it all before. When I got to the part about sending Mark that picture of his daughter, Frank let out a low whistle and shook his head. "Man," he said, pouring us both a shot of whiskey, "that's one hell of a story." We clinked glasses and drank. After that, we laughed. Not because it was funny, none of it really was, but because sometimes laughter is the only way to keep the weight of it all from crushing you. Looking back, I've asked myself more than once if I did the right thing. Was all that revenge worth it? Did it actually fix anything? Probably not. But at the same time, it gave me a sense of closure I wasn't sure I'd ever find. Anna and Mark got what they deserved. Claire found her own way out. And as for me, well, I'm still standing. So, to everyone who stuck around to read this, thanks. I needed to get it off my chest, to tell the whole story from beginning to end. Life's messy, unpredictable, and sometimes downright cruel. But you deal with it, you keep moving forward, and if you're lucky, you learn something along the way. Did I do the right thing? I don't know. Maybe yes, maybe no. But in the end, I'm still here, and I'm still moving forward. That's got to count for something, right?